Welcome to No Run MARE, the podcast dedicated to all things internet horror and creepypasta. Hosted by Alex Price. I do not own these stories and credits is correctly given down below. Enjoy, you disturbed individuals.
I work at a 24-hour pet ER, and we had a patient that wasn't an animal. The man walked in at 2 a.m., dragging something black behind him. The way it moved didn't sit right. Neither did he. The receptionist felt it immediately. It was the way he walked, stiff and uneven, like a scarecrow with one leg shorter than the other. He had greasy blonde hair beneath a 10-gallon hat, spurs clicking as he moved. I watched the security footage later. His lips were white and thin, his teeth crooked. His mouth twisted into a half smile, like he was seconds from laughter. He was dragging a massive black Rottweiler. The dog resisted, back paws sliding across the floor. The camera didn't pick up sound, but later, the two gals at reception told me what he said.
He's acting possessed.
They handed him intake forms. He hobbled back to a bench. I watched through the camera lens as another client holding a cat carrier slid away from him. I looked up his paperwork. The address led to some warehouse out in the scrublands, 3 states away. The name seemed fake too. Keaton. No records, no online presence. Didn't seem to fit him. But the dog's name? Mutt. That was the only detail I believed. You might wonder why I checked. It's not standard protocol, I don't usually do this. But the events of the last few nights led me to my search. When he handed the paperwork back, he sat down again, dragging the dog with him like a sack of flour. He leaned against the wall, arms folded, eyes fixed ahead. He moved like a corpse propped upright. His dog didn't move much either. It sat there, waiting. We see a lot of characters here. Some aggressive, some kind. But this man, something about him was wrong, in a way I can't articulate. I stepped into the lobby to bring him into an exam room. It took him a second to register me, like he was in a trance. And then, the smell hit me. Stale cigarettes, gas fumes. And beneath that, something worse. A rotten, greasy stench that clung to the air. The dog sat still, vacant, a husk. It was like someone had lobotomized it. As it stood there, drool began dripping from its mouth, pooling on the floor. I introduced myself and got to work.
So, what's going on with Mutt today?
Keaton didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted to the ceiling, like he was staring at something that fluttered in the air above us.
He ain't acting right. He ain't been eating much.
This is usually where the clients start rambling. Some could go on for hours if you let them. He had decided he had given me enough information. He sat staring at the ceiling through those dirty locks of hair. When I knelt to take the dog's heart rate, the second my fingers touched its skin, a wrongness crawled into me. That tingle before lightning strikes. That creeping dread when something awful is about to happen. The vitals were normal, the heart rate, breathing, but its skin was cold, and its temperature was 97 degrees lower than we like. I checked its skin, seeing how dehydrated it was. But when I peeled back its loose lips to check its gums, I felt a jolt of unease. Like I was too close to something I shouldn't be. The gums were pale, the pupils locked onto me, dilated. That feeling of unease was sickening.
Don't turn your back on him,
the man said. I paused mid-turn. Excuse me?
If you're gonna walk away from him, do it facing. Otherwise, something bad might happen.
I exhaled, irritated. He'd watched me get close to the dog, lean in, take its temperature, listen to its heart rate, yet now was the time he decided to warn me it was aggressive? I liked this situation less and less. Man, the dog, the way this whole situation ached in my gut. I backed away, facing the dog. Watched me like I was prey, like I was meat. A few moments later, our on-site emergency veterinarian, Dr. Harcum, came in. Old school, no nonsense. He and Keaton exchanged few words. The vet recommended blood work and an overnight stay with an IV fluid drip. The dog needed warming up, too. Keaton never lost that dumb smile, the half-cocked grin, like something was hilarious. But he nodded and accepted the treatment plan. We went to take the dog into the back treatment area. I slipped a muzzle on, of course. That's when I noticed how the dog refused to walk. The owner had dragged it behind him earlier, but now it wasn't acting lethargic. I could see it in its eyes. It was choosing not to move. It was being obstinate. I had a larger male staff member, Ryan, carry the dog for me. As he picked it up, he glanced at me. We didn't exchange words, but I knew he felt it too. Not only the dog, the air itself seemed to hum with an unearthly feeling. When we went to draw blood from its jugular, it didn't even react. Ryan held the dog steady, hands firm on either side of its head, jaws up. The needle slipped in, the syringe filled. The blood felt lukewarm, didn't feel like it had just been pumping through a live body. I ran it through the machines and it confirmed mild dehydration with some elevated lipase values indicating mild pancreatitis. We placed it on a heated kennel, tucked it under blankets, and hooked up the IV catheter. Keaton was gone, but relief was fleeting. Mutt remained, and with him came something unseen, a presence thick as fog, pressing in from all sides. That was 3 days ago. That night was quiet, rare for an emergency hospital. We had another dog kenneled 2 spaces down from the Rottweiler. It was a cattle dog that had undergone emergency laparotomy. He had been doing fine, normal vitals, good appetite, responsive. 2 hours later, I crossed into the back animal ward to check on it. The cattle dog was dead. It had torn open its own incision. The cone lay discarded. It hadn't just licked or nibbled. It had utterly and completely dismantled itself. Even when coils of intestine unfurled from its abdomen, it kept biting at those guts. The dog had attacked its own innards, as if they were coiled vipers waiting to lunge. The dog was in a wet slump, head limp against the floor. The blood ran in bright ribbons, swirling toward the kennel drain behind him. I heard the gentle slurp of the blood sucking down the drain. The kennel was a bloodbath. It streaked the walls, splattered the ceiling. His intestines had leaked a mixture of bile and digested sludge. The cattle dog's eyes were vacant orbs, glistening in the light. I stood still for a moment, taking in the horror, the scope of this violence. And 2 kennels down sat Mutt, eyes focused on my task, no expression on his stoic face. Fluid drip running, heater humming. There was only the sound of the blood in the pipes. Mutt didn't pant. He didn't whine. His eyes reflected the fluorescent light, and for one sickening second, they looked almost human. Dr. Harkham made the call, but I heard every word. Every choked sob through the thin walls of our office. The owner didn't cry. They wailed. I'd seen plenty of death in this job, but this was different. This wasn't bad luck. Something else had its hands in this. The mood in the hospital shifted palpably. In all my years, I'd never seen a dog unzip itself like a gym bag and spill out its intestines. His eyes followed every movement. The bloody towels, the mop buckets, cattle dog-sized body bag, zip-tied and labeled. That night was quiet, but it didn't feel like a break. I imagined I was in a field staring at thunderheads form like warships in the distant sky. That feeling was the promise of something worse to come. At some point, hours after the cattle dog's death, I heard the steady beeping of a monitor from the kennel ward. It was the IV pump hooked up to Mutt. I didn't want to go over there. But I did. I brought Ryan. We slipped the muzzle over Mutt's head. He didn't resist, didn't flinch. He let it happen. His eyes followed the movement of our hands as we buckled it behind his head. Only his eyes moved. 2 dark orbs. He was digesting the scene around him. Felt like he was learning and listening. The dog had kinked the IV line beneath its paw. We moved it aside, smoothed it out. That should have been it, a simple fix. But as soon as we turned to leave, the light above his kennel flickered. At first, we saw a light flicker. It was barely noticeable. Then it sputtered, dimmed, and cut out completely. The kennel dropped into shadow. Ryan and I froze. The only light now was a faint glow from the hallway behind us. We exchanged a glance. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us wanted to acknowledge what we were feeling. The air in the room changed, heavy, buzzing like the static before a storm. When the two tube lights above Mutt's kennel flared so bright it hurt to look at them, a pop, then a sizzle, and they died. Everything was silent. Ryan's back was to Mutt. Mutt lunged. It was a surge of violence, even with the muzzle strapped tight. A blur of black as Mutt's body lunged forward. The muzzled face rammed against Ryan's side, smashing into him, again and again. Ryan screamed. The dog was silent except for the mechanical snapping of his jaws, working beneath the muzzle. Spittle flying. Ryan twisted, trying to stand, but the sudden attack had taken him off guard. I reacted without thinking, threw open the kennel door. Mutt rammed into Ryan again, harder this time. The sheer force knocked him off balance. Ryan writhed around to grab at Mutt. The moment he faced Mutt, the dog stilled. It stood there, motionless, bathed in the new darkness. Something was wrong with this dog. Not neurologically. It was something so much deeper. I sensed the calculating intelligence of a predator, but it felt more malignant than that. Like a cancerous tumor spreading quietly beneath the surface of your skin. Ryan and I trembled, shaken to the core. Later, he revealed a bruise under his rib, a deep bloom of violet spreading like a rose beneath his skin. Neither of us spoke about it. The rest of the night passed without incident. Focused on my other cases for the night, I worked with the Chihuahua hacking through pneumonia, a Persian cat with seizures, and a tabby cat with proprioceptive issues in its forelimbs. I went through the motions, but my mind was elsewhere. Ryan seemed dazed, like something fresh had broken inside of him. It wasn't the shock, or the trauma, or the fear. It was more profound than that. I left for the night, still unsettled. Ryan didn't even wave goodbye when I passed by. I chain-smoked cigarettes in my car before driving home. Flicked the butts out the window and watched them sail onto the asphalt. My hands were shaking the entire ride. And when I finally collapsed into bed, I pulled my pistol out of my purse and slipped it under my pillow. And as the sun crept over the horizon, my dreams were wrong. I dreamed of a black face, snarling in the dark, leaning in, sniffling, eyes like hollow pits, endless swirling galaxies within. I felt the faraway sting of teeth sinking into my flesh. Not a bite, not an attack, but a slow, deliberate pressure, easing into my skin. When I woke, my sheets were damp with sweat. When I came in for my shift that night, I felt a deep sense of disappointment the second I walked past Mutt's kennel. He was still there, heater purring, eyes following. The lights above his kennel were still blown out. The ones beside him had started to flicker. Ryan called out sick, said he'd been throwing up since the night before. I had a feeling there was more to that story, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. I shot him a text wishing him well. He read it, yet he didn't reply. That sinister, eerie man who called himself Keaton, his phone went straight to dial tone when we tried calling for a case update. He wasn't coming back. He'd paid half his bill up front in crisp, old $100 bills. We weren't getting the other half. The night was busier. I told my manager we shouldn't put any other dogs in that ward, but we didn't have a choice. Our small animal ward was on the other side of the building, but for larger dogs, they had to go there. We admitted a Great Dane with liver disease. There was nowhere else to put him, so I placed him in the kennel farthest from Mutt. 2 down from the cattle dog that had ripped itself apart. When I went back to check on them 10 minutes later, I stopped cold. Mutt's kennel was wide open. The latch was undone. The door swung open. He wasn't on fluids anymore. Someone must have taken him off. There was no beeping fluid pump, and there was no sign of how the door had opened by itself. This part of the facility was desolate this time of night. Mutt was sitting right at the threshold, slack-jawed and unblinking. I shut the kennel, latched it, and then I left the room. I returned with 2 plates of food. Immediately, I felt nauseous. The kennel was wide open again. I hadn't heard a sound, hadn't seen the door move. The only way to unlatch these kennels is with hands, with opposable thumbs. I was certain no one had been back here while I grabbed the cans of food. I slammed it shut again, this time locking it with a makeshift carabiner clip. I slid 1 plate of food under each kennel. I gave a low-fat wet food for the Dane and critical care wet food for Mutt. I was walking away when I heard it. A sound that froze me. Not a growl, not a whine. It sounded like someone trying to speak while gargling a mouthful of water. Like a deep, male voice gargling on words before spitting them out. It was the sound of a dog trying to talk. I turned. Mutt sat there, silent now. Something tingled in the air, musical conductor guiding along an orchestra. Because to my right, the Dane had begun to cry. The Dane was the one making these ungodly noises. The Dane's plate of food lay spilled across the kennel floor. His hackles folded back. The Dane backpedaled until its body pressed against the far wall. I watched the Dane's gaze flicker up toward the ceiling. It became immediately apparent to me that the dog was feeling something. A deeply instinctual and inexplicable something. I knew it was feeling that way, because I felt it too. When I reached for the kennel door, the crying stopped. The Dane's body trembled, then his whimpering changed. It deepened into a low, eerie sound, like a tornado siren, changing in pitch and tone, high to low. Without warning, it stopped altogether. The dog went still, too still, gathering itself back to a normal pose. Then, all at once, the Dane began attacking its own leg. Not chewing, not licking, ripping, breaking. These were deep, pulverizing bites. Bone audibly cracked in the echo of the cavernous hallway. Blood splattered the kennel floor. It wasn't a dog in pain, it wasn't a dog in distress. It was something else. This dog was destroying itself with purpose. I couldn't go in there. If I did, he'd likely redirect his aggression onto me. He would send me to the hospital if I tried to intervene. I turned and ran, shouting for help as I sprinted through the clinic. Dr. Harkham and 2 other techs, Angie and Denise, came rushing out of an exam room. The hallway filling with the sound of my frantic screaming, I grabbed a rabies catch pole and beat them back to the kennels. The Dane was still biting, not a rabid and frothy frenzy, but instead an ungodly calm and intentional one. The flesh of its leg hung in shredded tatters, tendon and the suggestion of bone beneath. Blood spurted like pulsing shots from a water gun in rhythm with its heartbeats. I slipped open the kennel door and looped the catch pole around its neck, tightening it hard. In a wrenching movement, I maneuvered its head enough to stop it from lunging at its own body. It snapped in the air, frantic, without even a hint of pain or emotion behind it. Then, latched onto the metal pole. Not out of panic, not out of rage, out of a bizarre corruption of instinct. The sound was unbearable, teeth breaking against metal, splintering, shattering. The flesh of its leg was gone, a ragged mess of meat exposed to the air that flapped as it chewed at the metal. I saw a part of a fractured canine fall out of its mouth. The catchpole was bloody, dented, but holding firm, withstanding each powerful bite directed at it. The dog was weakening by the time Dr. Harkham arrived, slumping over in the drenched puddle of its own blood. By the time we managed to inject a sedative, it was too late. The blood loss was too severe. The Dane collapsed to the floor, body twitching, biting at the air. It wound down like a toy with dying batteries, its eyes glazing over before going limp. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Mutt. Lips pulled back in a snarl. "When is that fucking dog gonna leave?" I snapped, pointing at him. Dr. Harkham shot me a sharp look. Blood streaked his white coat. His eyes were dark, hollowed with an exhaustion brought on long before Mutt entered our lives. "Something is wrong with it," I insisted. "With him. All I see is a dog who mutilated itself in our care and then bled out. Mind you, this is the second one in 2 days. Don't worry about that fucking dog." He gestured at Mutt emphatically. "We have bigger issues here. I have another owner to call, another person I have to tell their pet killed itself under my watch. God, this is a mess." He flicked blood from his fingers, dragged a sleeve across his face. He was years past burnout, a shell of his former self. He couldn't see what I saw. He couldn't see the way Mutt watched, the way his eyes lingered over the carnage pooling beneath my feet, like he was enjoying it. Dr. Harkham sighed, rubbing a hand down his face.
We tried calling that creepy bastard again. Number's out of service. He ditched the dog on us.
That meant we had to rehome it. It could take weeks. I couldn't take weeks with him. None of us could. And as I looked into Angie's eyes, I knew she felt the same. And over the next few hours, the hospital settled into an uneasy silence. The night shift pressed on, but something had shifted. We were all exhausted, hollowed out by what we had seen. The cattle dog, the Great Dane, the blood. 2 blood-drenched kennels we had to clean up. Mutt still sat in his kennel, untouched food sitting at his feet. The heater hummed in the background. 2 more lights flickered out while I cleaned. I mopped blood from the floors, the thick iron scent clinging to my skin. The mess soaking the towels we used was a deep, ugly red. And through it all, Mutt never looked away from us. A shadow looming in the dark part of his corridor. I told myself I'd figure something out. That I needed time, but time wasn't on my side. I was dumping a load of bloody towels into the laundry bin when I heard it. I dropped everything. A voice, thick and wet, slurred in a way no dog's throat was built to produce. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't a growl. It was trying to speak. And what came out wasn't a sound. It was a name. My name. Alison. I turned, stomach lurching. Mutt was sitting in his kennel, still, muzzle slack, drool pooling on the blanket beneath him. His pupils seemed to swallow all the remaining light. I couldn't move. My brain was trying to rationalize it, trying to shove what I had just heard into a box of normalcy. Maybe I'd misheard it. Maybe it was the pipes or a monitor. Then, the stench of rot hit my nose like a sniff of smelling salts. It was not the usual smell of the hospital, not the faint antiseptic and animal musk that always clung to the air. This was meat left in the sink for weeks. This was something dead, wedged into the unseen cracks of the world. It was a volatile and overpowering scent consuming anything else in the room. And I realized then that the smell I'd caught when Keaton first walked into the lobby, that greasy, putrid stench, it hadn't been him. It had been Mutt all along. I felt a desire deep in my core to run, and so I did. I scooped up the blankets off the floor, shoved them into the laundry bin, and bolted, My hands shook as I crammed the lid shut. My pulse was a hammer in my ears.
Don't turn your back on it.
The memory of Keaton's words crawled down my spine like a cold hand.
He's acting possessed.
I knew what Mutt had tried to do to Ryan. I knew what he wanted to do to me, and now I knew I wasn't waiting for him to act. I was gonna kill him. I kept my head down the rest of the shift, biding my time. My mind wasn't on the cases I took. I worked on autopilot. I went through the motions, but my body was moving without me. And when I got a moment alone, I pulled up 20 milliliters of pentobarbital sodium and phenytoin sodium solution. It's a medication called euthisol. In other words, it's that sparkling pink liquid we in the veterinary field use to put animals down. I drew up enough of the stuff to kill a dog twice Mutt's size. It'd be a discrepancy in the controlled substance log, but I could smooth it out over the next few weeks. A couple of slightly higher doses given on euthanasia cases. If I logged these with enough time between them, I was confident no one would notice. I locked the cabinet, slid the syringe into my pants pocket. By doing this, I was committing a crime, breaking DEA laws. I could lose my license, my career, even end up in jail. But deep in my bones, I knew one thing for certain. That thing in the kennel, whatever it was, needed to die. The next morning when I arrived for my shift, the hospital was heavy with grief. Everyone was crying. Because it turned out Ryan was dead. He'd taken his own life in his trailer sometime after work. No details, no explanation. He was there one day, then he was gone the next. The police had come by to inform us. They didn't stay long, didn't need to. I knew then Ryan's death cemented what I had to do in my mind. I couldn't wait until another dog was placed in those kennels, until another staff member was pushed over the edge. So I worked through the grief, through the horror, pushing it all into a place I'd deal with later. I waited for the right moment, a lull between shift changes, when staffing was light. I approached Mutt's kennel. He cocked his head, his eyes tracking my movements. He looked almost expectant. I opened the kennel door and slid the muzzle over his face. My hands moved with a sharpness I hadn't felt before. I yanked the straps too tight, a bit of malice in my actions. My pulse was steady. I held Mutt's paw, feeling for the vein, my other hand already slipping the needle beneath the skin. The syringe in my palm felt hot. I pushed the plunger, forcing the thick pink liquid into his veins. It was a heavy dose, too much for even the largest dog, but I pushed every last drop. Normally, euthanasia is instant. Body slumps, the muscles relax, and life fades like a deep exhale. Their eyes stay open, but they flood with vacancy. Mutt didn't move. His chest still rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm. His muscles remained locked, rigid. His pupils, wide and black, never left mine. This dose should have ended him. This dog should be dead. The hallway lights flickered, one by one. The bulbs sizzled out, plunging the kennel ward into a profound darkness. The air thickened, heavy with the weight of something unseen. The heater shuddered to a stop. The only glow now came from the exit sign at the far end of the hall, casting a weak green wash over the kennels. The shadows seemed to twist and dance around me. I felt adhered to the spot, unable to move. The door to the kennel slammed shut behind me. My breath hitched. The silence was absolute now, only interspersed with the slow, wet rasp of Mutt's breathing. I could feel him in the dark, the weight of his presence gnawing at the air. The voice came from before me, deep into the churning pool of shadows further back into the kennel. Sound like vocal cords cut like strings and hidden beneath a mound of scar tissue. A broken, misshapen mouth trying to shape words. The vowels stretched, dripping with something slick and inhuman. My stomach lurched. I reached for the latch, fingers fumbling, but my hands were slick with sweat. My breathing was too loud. The darkness pressed in, the rot smell thickened, crawling up my throat. Then, I felt it. A cold, dead hand closed around my ankle. I choked on a scream. My body jolted as something gripped me. Those jagged fingernails pressed against the fabric of my scrub pants. The air rippled in an electric wash. The sensation of static snapped against my skin. I turned in a single heaving motion, and I ran. The kennel door gave way beneath my shoulder, and I burst into the hallway, feet pounding against the tile. Behind me, I heard the kennel door smash open, the sound of paws, heavy and fast, hitting the ground. He was coming. I sprinted blindly through the dark, running my fingers along the wall as I searched for the end of the hallway. When I reached it, my fingers scraped against the smooth wood, for a time, completely unable to find a knob. A latch. My fingers graced only an endless surface. Paws pounded closer behind me. I swear I heard more than one set of them. It sounded almost like a quiet herd. There was no growling, no snarling, no warning, just the rush of movement in the dark. A silent freight train barreling toward me. So I spun, pressing my back against the door. The darkness beyond was absolute, thick and suffocating. The emergency exit sign glowed faint above me, swallowing the building in a weak neon glow. The slap of paws on tile stopped, and I saw the faint outline of a hunched beast. A panther crouched beneath, brush seeking out its prey. Breathing filled the void, slow, wet, thick with malice. Then, whisper of movement. So close I felt the air shift around my face. I turned and bolted down the hall. Instinct drove me forwards, without thought or plan. My body simply moved on its own accord. I reached my locker, yanked it open, hand scrambling for my purse. The air shifted, a weight pressed close. I felt it before I saw it. A swirling black hole yawning, open behind me. My fingers closed around cold metal, the grip of my handgun. I turned and I raised the barrel towards the faint figure I could make out in the darkness, and I fired. The first shot lit up the hallway like a camera flash. That brief flicker, I saw him. That snarling grin. The second shot, third. His body jerked, but he didn't fall. My ears buzzed with each concussive shot. In the green shimmer of the exit sign, I saw that his lips were still curled back. That awful rictus. The sixth and final shot hit its mark. The left side of his skull caved inward, the muzzle of his face blown apart where the bullet had exited. Even in the thin light, I saw how his jaw sagged open, how that tongue flopped out limp. And even as he fell, his head twitched. A violent, unnatural snap of movement. A thick, wet pop echoed. He swayed, and finally, collapsed in a heap all at once. I stood there, gun trembling in my hands, ears ringing. The darkness still pulsed around me, thick and heavy, pressing in from all sides. Then, footsteps. Shouts, voices. Someone grabbed my arm, yanking me back. The lights flickered, buzzed, then flared back to life. For the first time, I saw what I had done. One shot had buried itself in the tile. The rest had hit him. Mutt lay on his side, his head a ruin of blood and bone. His chest rose once, twice. Then he went still. The bite muzzle was missing. Must have pulled it off somewhere during the chase. I didn't move. The hospital swarmed with police. I don't know who called them or when, but they arrived fast. A slew of questions. I registered almost nothing in my haze. They took me into the back office, my hands still shaking, my ears still filled with the phantom echoes. I knew exactly what I had to say. I knew how to frame it. Self-defense. My Uncle Philip was a defense attorney. He talked shop often with me on our fishing trip outings together, so I knew a little more than I let on. And I managed to play my part well. So, the police let me go. We wrapped, bagged, and stuffed Mutt in the freezer, awaiting cremation. And I took time off work. Spent a few days in silence trying to erase the memory of that voice. Trying to ignore that palpable sound of my name, some twisted, malformed mouth. As you likely imagined, it didn't work. The phone rang on the morning of my scheduled return to work. It was a blocked number. Part of me knew the call was coming, as irrational as that sound, and so I answered. Slow, shaky breathing filled the line. And then, he began to laugh. Like everything that had happened to me was a hilarious joke. Low, drawling, thick with something I couldn't name. Maybe it was a mouthful of tobacco chew.
You shouldn't have killed it, little lady.
Keaton. His voice slithered through the speaker, curling like a snake around my spine. His laughter built, rising, filling the silence.
You've gone and made things so much worse.
And as the laughing turned into hollering, the line clicked dead. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, staring up at nothing. His words weighing down the air. Gone and made things so much worse. My first thought was confusion. How did he get my number? My second thought was frantic. Those words struck a chord deep inside my marrow. He said I'd made things worse. And for some reason, deep in the pit of my soul, I believed him. Hey guys, it's Alex, host of the No Run MARE podcast. I'm so glad that you decided to tune in and watch today's episode. This episode is called, I worked at a 24-hour pet ER and we had a patient that wasn't an animal. This was written by Skull Knitter on Reddit on r/nosleep. As always with all of these stories, the links to them will be down below. I have links to the original story and the original author's Reddit page. I definitely enjoyed this one, and I really hope you guys are looking forward to part 2 that is coming up very, very soon. So, before I head out of here, I just want you guys to do me a quick favor, and if you like this podcast, try to listen on audio platforms. We are on all major audio platforms, including Audible, iTunes, Spotify, Amazon Music, wherever you get your podcast, we'll be there. It just helps us out a lot, and it helps me, have more motivation to create more episodes like this. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this one, make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and if you are on those audio platforms, just go ahead and give us a 5-star rating. It really helps more than you know. But without further ado, until next time, stay scared.